There's a pattern I've noticed lately that I wanted to talk about today, and I think it serves in part to explain the sort of social drought of the past decade, wherein everyone is hiding from each other, while simultaneously it seems like everyone is trying desperately to thrust themselves into the spotlight. Our generation in particular, meaning Gen Z, is both uncommonly isolated and highly narcissistic, which naturally heightens the difficulty of fostering genuine connections. When I was younger, I assumed that this was my fault, the things that I was noticing, and to some extent it certainly was. But in my adult years, this sense of unease and dread has just kind of lingered as I've noticed people's shifting patterns of behavior. It seems like we've collectively forgotten ourselves. We've forgotten how to appreciate, accommodate, or even tolerate those around us. And beneath it all, people long to be witnessed. They always have, it's just harder to own up to these days. We're entertaining this constant tug of war between our fear of being forgotten and our fear of discomfort. The brain, more than anything, despises discomfort. And so what ends up happening is we filter out opportunities and instead we label them as inconveniences. So I am an introvert and I always have been. And I'll fully admit I've been guilty of entering a room and sitting as far away from whoever else might be in there so as not to draw attention to myself. And yet I can still give you so many examples from my own life that I've seen of just truly disconnected behavior. This is not the same world that I grew up in. There's so many times where I've walked down the street and seen someone that I know, like we are on a friendly basis, and they will pull out their phone and, we'll just kind of walk by and ignore each other because it's easier to ignore your own acquaintances or even friends if you're not in a setting that is specifically tailored to socialization than to risk seeming awkward for 45 seconds. I have made an effort even in some of my college classes and some lectures and things just to acknowledge people around me, and that's hard for me to do, but I've had so many instances of even just saying like, "Hi, what's your name?" where you get the nastiest look and they just kind of, they might answer, they might not, but they kind of like just stare at you like you have three heads and then look away. And I mean, for those of you who attended college many moons ago, maybe it's always been this way and maybe I look freakish and it's definitely my fault. So you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I do feel like that's not normal and is possibly not how life has always been. We talk a lot about the erasure of third spaces, but I even think second spaces, work and school, for so long were such important pillars of a person's social environment, if that makes sense. I also have made myself leave the house before to go to social events, parties, club events, places where the people showing up there have voluntarily decided to set aside their time to be around other people, other young people typically. And what ends up happening is you're in a corner or you're at a table and it's like you look around and everyone in the room is just scrolling on their phones. There's so many of us, so many bright, beautiful, quite possibly hilarious young people. I mean, it just feels so stilted and it feels impossible just to draw out even the smallest semblances of small talk. People really do not want to be asked where they're from when they could be the real count of the day. And it is odd because I have had so many people confide in me that they feel lonely, that they are looking for opportunities, that they're hoping that opportunities come along to make friends, to network, even to connect with people. And so it's like here people are hoping desperately, maybe not desperately, I shouldn't be assuming that, but hoping for praise and attention from somebody, and yet their behavior is signaling that you're not worth detaching from the slot machine, basically, of just endless content and information that tends to rile up negative emotions in people anyways. And we've all noticed this. People remark on it in polite conversation from time to time. We acknowledge that we're living in a society of addicts, But I think that with the collapse we've seen of third spaces, where we don't have as many cafes and parks, not that they don't exist anymore, and meetup spots where people feel it is socially acceptable for them to go and spend their free time looking to meet someone. I think because we no longer have these places, or at least we believe that, we don't have access to those kind of situations, everyone just caves. They end up opting for the path of least resistance. I'm sure we have all done it. Maybe you don't want to be one of the people that is just a zombie glued to the device, but no one else in the room is looking up and acknowledging you, and so you're like, you know what, I might as well check my email. So I'm not putting blame on anyone that participates in this, because we're all guilty of it. I mean, hello, look where you are right now, what you're doing. I also think we see this with dating, where so many people on dating apps these days never wanted to download dating apps. When they were growing up, that's not where they envisioned meeting their person. But I think so many people cave and they end up on the apps. Not that that's a moral failing, not because they don't want to have a little meet cute or friendship that turns into something more, but because they have come to the decision or to the realization that they're very unlikely to be approached in public and to make something happen maybe within a circle of acquaintances, right? And so if you don't think that you're going to meet someone at church or at the grocery store, then what else is there for you if you're someone that's looking for a long-term relationship? I don't think that our world today is so awful. There's so many wonderful developments that have come from technological innovation. We live in such a convenient world, at least in first world countries at this point. But I think deep down, this discontent comes from the fact that we have expectations for our life that were planted in us back in 2009, but the world no longer looks anything like it did in 2009. It could be a different year for you, but I'm speaking from a place of someone who grew up in the 2000s. Part of the reason that we don't address this addiction that we have to the internet, that the average person has these days, is because it has become somewhat of a safe space and an outlet for us in itself. I think the reason that person you went to high school with is constantly posting about the marathon that they ran or about their wedding is because no one's congratulating them about it at work. They don't feel safe talking to their neighbors about it, or they don't feel that they can engage meaningfully with those around them about these personal accomplishments without being a burden or without just coming across as a complete weirdo. So we exist in this awful paradox where the very thing that caused this social drought is the only thing we feel we have to turn to console ourselves in the midst of our circumstances. And I will concede absolutely that the lengths to which people will go to share their lives on the internet has gone way too far. I do love those comments where people say, like, did the journal factory explode? When people are sharing the most outrageous and private details of their lives. But as much as you can sit there and judge, people have always wanted to be noticed, and people have always wanted to be remembered. We have seen this desire to be remembered play out in the culture since the dawn of time. So many accomplished men of the past who waged wars or discovered new scientific phenomena, they would say that they did it for the purpose of continuing their legacy and creating a name for themselves. Powerful men such as kings would have these giant oil paintings and statuesque renditions of them created, and they would commission biographies, sometimes even plays to be created in their name and in their honor. And so narcissism is something that I think we as humans are prone to, and we ought to resist it as best as we can. But it's not a new thing, this desire that people have for attention and praise and to be witnessed, to be a valuable member of the tribe, so to speak. I mean, maybe we see it nowadays with these influencers living ridiculously lavish lives, but I maintain that the rich and the wealthy and the elite have always sought to mythologize themselves in some way. And we even see this with ordinary people giving their sons their same name, right? Like John Jr. or whatever. Not even quite a century ago, young men, teenage boys even, would go off to war with the risk of being killed in the hopes that their father would finally recognize them, finally be proud of them, finally have something to say about them. And, if they came from an impoverished background, maybe they felt like this was the only way to make a name for themselves and to have, either posterity, or if they were to perish without posterity, future relatives talk about them as though they were an honorable person who had accomplished something other than, working in the mines and slaving away all day. If you think about it, even cave paintings were kind of a way of representing your value in society and the life that you were able to live, your status, so to speak. And I also think we may have our expectations set way too high for what community has to look like and how many people we need in our corner. With the vast amounts of information and representations of various lifestyles we now have access to, I think we get the wrong idea about what it means to be fulfilled, to be loved, to be cared for. I mean, if you know that there's someone out there that has 2 million people logging on to watch them make their breakfast, of course you're gonna feel like a loser with your 2 or 3 friends that you might have. Or, maybe you feel like something's wrong with you because you don't have friends of your own age, or you engage a lot more with family members to fill that void of coworkers that you can go to the bar with, or, a potentially a romantic partner, whatever that might be. And I think we forget that friendship and connection has come in so many different forms and still does within different cultures. There are plenty of cultures to this day where cultivating friendships outside of your own family is not even the norm, right? Is not even really a priority. And some people do and have spent their whole lives with the same set of people in the same town. And I don't think that makes them unloved. I don't think that means that they will be forgotten necessarily, or that they didn't make their mark. Certainly, if you did not have access to fame and fortune during your life, you're less likely to end up in the textbooks and in paintings somewhere. I mean, you either have a star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame or you don't. But there's more to life than being remembered and memorialized in that way. So we are seeing an increasing proportion of adults living and working alone. And I will say that it takes a strong person with a very rich inner life to remain in good health when there are so many barriers to entry for connection. So for me, when I was 6 years old, I decided that I never really saw myself getting married. And so I've always kind of envisioned this life for myself where I live on my own, I have my own place, I come home to my dogs, I work obviously, but then I spend the majority of my free time engaging in volunteer service, in my hobbies, and in skill building as well. But I do recognize that that is not the typical life that most people aspire to. And so I can imagine that if you are living this lifestyle not by choice, I can imagine that you would feel scammed, that you would feel behind in life, discouraged, disillusioned maybe with the American dream or whatever it might be that you were promised. And even as a child, people would not react well to me telling them I intended to kind of be just my own person, like I guess the single aunt or whatever. They'd say that that was their personal nightmare. And I think that part of the reason that I would get so much negative feedback about this is because for a lot of people, they fear not having someone there to witness their life. And for them, that's, part of the appeal of a life partner is, I guess it gives you the sense of not being forgotten, of not being invisible, at least to someone. And I do think that a lot of people kind of need that to lean on. They need that sense of comfort and companionship. And I'm not saying that there aren't other things that, getting married or having a family has to offer, but I do think that that is a component of, having a really icked out gut reaction to hearing that someone is maybe comfortable living by themselves. Additionally, this phenomenon of so many adults in our society living on their own means that so many conscientious and productive people are not really receiving credit for the effort that they put in on the daily. I mean, naturally, external validation and external pressure is very motivating to a lot of people. And I think for so many people, they're like, what's the point, if no one gets to see my cute outfit, right? No one is there to notice how clean I keep my house. And there's also the other side of the coin where no one saw how you picked yourself up off the bathroom floor and kept going when you were at your lowest, and no one has seen how far you've come from wherever you started. And I don't think there's anything wrong or unnatural about wanting to be celebrated in a sense for working hard and for making an effort to improve as a human being. I'm not fully condoning the use of participation trophies, so to speak, but I do think that a lack of positive feedback can be really unhealthy for some people and can be conducive to the development of depression, anxiety, or even psychotic breaks, as we have seen in certain cases. Because if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it make a sound? And objectively, the answer to this is yes, it emitted some kind of sound frequency, whether anyone was there to witness it or not. But we do get this sense that we're invisible, that we don't matter, that there is no reward and there is nothing to be gained for waking up every day if there is never anyone to see or hear the evidence of your existence. And the truth is, people don't just need to be seen and heard for the positive events in their life. I really think that a lack of closeness has been the catalyst to a lot of these very public breakdowns that we've seen over the years on the internet. And this subject always makes me think of Trisha Paytas, who is doing amazingly now from what I can tell. She has a family and she's built a business off of her podcast, and she's living the life that she always dreamed of. But for so many years on YouTube, she was notorious for, posting videos sitting in front of her fridge on the kitchen floor and, breaking down, sobbing, overeating, just telling the internet the kind of things that you would express to a best friend if you had someone like that there to support you. And more recently, we've seen a really disturbing case of this with Perez Hilton. And I'm not going to touch on the controversy of whether Perez deserves sympathy at this time due to the fact that he made his money for so many years off of brutally making fun of and exposing celebrities in their low moments, right? But if you don't know, and I do hope that you haven't seen the video, I was fortunate enough not to see the original video that was going around. Perez Hilton is basically a former celebrity gossip blogger, and he, up until recently, has transitioned over to TikTok live content and YouTube videos. And he had a psychotic break recently, is the only way I have to explain it. He does have children and lives with his mother, but he does not have a partner. He has not been doing as well financially lately. And he got online covered in blood and was harming himself with a weapon. And this remained online for about 30 minutes from what I've heard, and thousands of people witnessed it. I'm not here to say that the internet is the cause and the catalyst for mental illness episodes. Ever since humans have had brains, there has always been mental illness, and people have always been struggling with it, sometimes privately, occasionally publicly. But even though there could be a 4 clicks component to these kind of things, I think if we had stronger in-person communities in our modern Western society, people would not feel desperate and empty and low enough to feel the need to turn the camera on themselves at their very darkest moments. I also think for people who have created their careers online and their financial well-being is dependent on the amount of eyes that are on them on a regular basis, there comes a danger from craving attention and validation, being so codependent on it, right? That you will do anything to obtain it. And you'll also accept any kind of attention, whether positive or extremely negative. This also made me think of a trend that was popular on TikTok recently, where people would post text screenshots of the most heartbreaking and dehumanizing things being said to them, or they would post pictures of them in their breakdowns and in their low and emotional moments, or they would post, journal entries of them dissecting anguish and grief and heartbreak and that sort of thing. And it was to the tune of an Olivia Rodrigo song, and specifically a lyric that says, "You will never know my sorrow." And the idea is that people are posting this to express that they're going through something troubling, and that no one in their personal life would ever guess what they're going through, will ever know their sorrow. And a lot of these videos did have a fair amount of views and likes, but it also was so disheartening to see, especially young women getting on the internet and posting really truly personal and hurtful things that they've been through. Breakup texts or pictures of their parents' casket, or the last moment between themselves and a friend that chose to end their life. And these videos have virtually no views. And so, yeah, it was sad to see people pouring their heart out and to get barely any likes and attention. You know, it's kind of like that was all for what, right? And it's unfortunate, but they are competing with a flooded metaverse to be seen. And so no matter how shocking the content of the videos are, we see things like that every day. And so a lot of these cries for help that I just talked about will honestly never be witnessed. So what do we do then? What do we do now? Well, first of all, I wouldn't know. Who am I, right? But there is a general principle that I think we ought to tap into more, and that is, if you want others to be interested in you, you first have to be interested in others. If you want to be remembered, you need to make an effort to remember others. Something else I've noticed is that I've seen multiple different people online talk about how they frequently daydream of being interviewed, being a celebrity and being interviewed by Howard Stern or Jimmy Fallon, or just being on like a talk show or a podcast in general. And I didn't know, prior, that so many people fantasize about being interviewed. And I mean, clearly I feel like people fantasize about being a celebrity, about being on the other end of prying or inquisitive questions, because people dream of having someone be genuinely interested in them. That is such a sign that we really are experiencing a lack of empathy and of curiosity in our interactions with one another. But it is a bit funny to me, out of all the things that people could dream about, right? People used to dream of being able to fly, and now they just dream of being loved and noticed. And even before the rise of influencer culture, there was a whole industry dedicated to following and tracking the every moves of celebrities and prominent people, what they're wearing, what they're eating. People would camp outside and wait for these people to make an appearance somewhere. And something I was thinking about with all of this is, what if, just what if we took the time that we devoted to following and tracking and being in awe of these random people online and on TV? What if we took that awe and we instead turned it outwards to the people in our own lives? What if we were in awe to that same extent and interested in to that same extent our acquaintances and our friends? What if we were just as interested in what they're wearing, and we were just as willing to forgive their mistakes, not the like immoral ones, right? Like, I'm not talking about Epstein and his crew, but I'm talking about the little flaws that people have that we're willing to accept from people that we are told to admire in the media. And what if we could focus in on people's positive traits as if they were a celebrity? What if we could bring that same energy to the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? I think also, if you are in a spot in your life where you're lacking community and you've done what you can to build it, and you simply don't have the kind of resources to make your ideal community a reality, it can help to reframe what it means to be seen and known. I think, for example, for religious people, it can help to view God as a sort of witness of your life. And I'm fortunate enough not to be completely isolated in my daily life, but I have found it comforting throughout the years, as someone who does believe in a higher power, to remind myself that there's someone that's watching me and someone that has my best interests in mind and is rooting for me. Ultimately, I like to tell myself that, God has seen every moment in my life that maybe other people would never know about. He has seen from my birth until the version of me that exists currently. And maybe this is a reach, and maybe I'm crazy, but what about animals? What about pets who you've had shared experiences with, who live in your home, whose entire lives you have witnessed? Does that count as connection? Does that count as being known or being remembered? And on that note, on the tree falling in a forest question, there's certainly always an animal or two around in a forest to hear a tree falling. So, I mean, if you need to become a hippie, a tree hugger, someone that does goat yoga and connect with nature to compensate for maybe a lack of human connection that you're experiencing, I say by all means do it. And I also would like to emphasize, please don't put your life on hold waiting for there to be someone to share your experiences with. There's a reason that when people journal, they write with an audience in mind. You can always share your memories and your stories later on in life after they have happened. And in that way, there can be someone else to witness or recognize what has happened to you. You can go ahead and make the memories now. You don't need to wait for permission. And I think so many of us do that. I don't know who's watching this, whether it's the best day or the worst day or the most mediocre day of your life, but no matter how far you've fallen or how long you've been in hiding, you still have intrinsic value. You always will, and you are still deserving of pursuing the life of your dreams, whatever that looks like, so long as it's not following in Ted Bundy's footsteps, okay? We don't endorse that here. And I'm trying not to get too corny. If that bothers you, you can skip like 30 seconds ahead in the video. But there is that old metaphor, analogy, whatever it might be, where you have a diamond that falls to the side of the road and is covered in dust, and people walk by it every day not knowing that there is a literal diamond mere feet away from them. Your circumstances do not change what you are, do not change the value that you hold. That diamond is still a diamond no matter where it is, or no matter who does or does not recognize it for what it is. You certainly are valuable, and you certainly can play a part in helping others recognize the value in themselves as well. Everyone wants a village, but no one wants to be a villager. And in a time when no one wants to be a villager, go be supportive. Don't be a stalker, but be there, be present, cheer people on when possible. Show people that you are, or that you still are, invested in their story, even if it is just the crazy man on the subway who wants to tell you about his experiences in the Vietnam War, right? Sometimes we do have to entertain that, because you never know what people are needing. And lastly, it might be time to log off. So I went ahead and I brought some grass for you to touch. Yeah, just really get in there. Yep, no excuses, touch some grass.